Hello and welcome my Varieties 4 students. This is an introductory session to Varieties 4, which is a complementary class to Varieties 1, 2, and 3. In your previous Varieties classes, you worked on different types of factual texts, such as newspaper articles, legal contracts, scientific reports, and extracts of spoken English. In Varieties 4, you're going to be introduced to literary texts. And to be specific, you will be working on extracts of narratives and chunks of poetry. You will analyze literary texts from a stylistic point of view. You will analyze the different levels of stylistic choices, be them at the level of grammar, diction, syntax, all the linguistic choices made by the authors. And we will pay a special attention to the stylistic features. That is to say, the important marked use of words, grammar, sounds, and layout. And we will look at the stylistic function behind every stylistic feature. We will see how language operates in literature, and we will examine the text in terms of the structure, diction, and phraseology. As you know, the language of literature is known as the language of rhetoric, of innovation and deviation, and this is why the language of literature has always been considered as persuasive and very powerful. This is the outline of lecture 1. Okay, it's going to be divided into 3 main sections, including the summary and the assignment. The first section, you will be introduced to stylistics. I know that you already have a background about stylistics, but why not to remind you again of key concepts of stylistics and style. Then we will move to talk about stylistics in reference to literature. Alright? And you will identify the differences between stylistic analysis and a literary criticism analysis. Alright? You will see that stylistics is a very objective, takes a very objective approach to literature, while literary criticism analysis is quite subjective, as we also tend to focus on how the narration unfolds, the plot, how the personal life of the author is impacted in the text. Okay, we are kind of interested in the themes and so on, while stylistics focuses on the text itself. It deconstructs and describes the text and tries to come up with data about the use of language, the nature of sentences, the words, the diction, the kind of connectors used, and so on. This is just to come up with a bigger picture of how the author actually uses language and come up with the style that he adopts. Then we will move to talk about the framework for literary stylistic analysis. Of course, we will be adopting the same framework that you worked by in your previous classes of varieties. We will start actually analyzing a text taken from Charles Dickens' masterpiece Hard Times. We will work on chapter 5. It's made of maybe 3 pages max, and we will look at the text and see what kind of a style is prevailed throughout the text. We will specifically look at the paragraphing, graphology, and punctuation. Okay, so for this lecture, we will limit ourselves to these three elements of stylistics. We will simply analyze paragraphing, graphology, and punctuation. Then we will sum it all up, and we will wrap it up with a simple assignment to be done at home. Now let's begin with the introduction. Literary language has been assigned a special character since antiquity. It has been considered as sublime and distinctive from all the other types of language. In fact, there are two key words here that you need to remember every time you read or analyze a literary text. They are sublime and distinctive. Now, if you look up the word sublime in your dictionary, you will find out that it refers to something of high moral and intellectual value, elevated in nature or style. Alright? And this explains well the essence of literary text. Literature deals and addresses themes of human experiences with an extraordinary language. Okay? Because literature is art in the first place, and poets as well as writers or authors are artists in this domain or discipline. They would use and write in a language that is full of and laden with rhetorical figures and aesthetic linguistic devices in order to attract the readers as well as convey their inner deep thoughts and ideas, okay, to the readership, especially that literature always plays on the sensitive chords of human feelings, sentiments, emotions, and senses. And perhaps this is what makes the language of literature very persuasive and powerful in nature. People might read a short story or a novel and end up changing their mind regarding a certain issue, or they might read like a chunk or a couple of lines in a poetry and then end up adopting a new worldview. And why it is distinctive because literary texts are special. They are special in the full sense of the word. They are unlike any other text in the world because literature betrays all your expectations of language use. Alright? Writers and poets will always resist the ordinary use of language, even if it requires them to use sometimes ill forms or ungrammatical sentences and phrases. They would play, juggle, and sometimes gimble with unusual syntactic structures and abnormal grammatical rules. It's true that they are in this domain, they are fully licensed. Okay? They have the license to do this, to break the rules of language. And readers have become accustomed to reading such texts and they have become even they have become even like very much expecting such deviations of language. Alright, you would read a text and you know that there are going to be some deviant forms sometimes, or unusual as well as ungrammatical syntactic structures. So readers of literature will always expect such deviations of language, and they would welcome them wholeheartedly. Alright, so again, authors, poets would work diligently to write text according to their own terms and their own rules of language use, however, without crippling your understanding. Okay, they would do it for the for deliberate deviation or for the sake of linguistic aesthetic. Mm, this is why literature is a leisure and people find it of great pleasure, because it feeds their minds with knowledge and in the same time it entertains them. This is why literary texts are very popular and writers are treated as stars in this field, because they deal with language with creativity and novelty. Alright, so let's go back. The reason for this is the special use of language, which is deviant from ordinary, everyday, non-literary language. Okay, this is gonna be obvious after maybe analyzing a couple of texts of literary texts. You will find that they are completely different from your previous factual texts that you studied back in varieties 1 and 2 and 3. So literary texts break all the common and agreed upon norms and rules of syntax, morphology, semantics, phonology, and grammar. So as you know, my students, literature comes in different forms. It can be poetry, narrative, or drama. Okay, and in every form we have genres and subgenres. Okay, now for the sake of this class we're going to focus on poetry and narrative. Unfortunately, drama is not part of the core syllabus. Here are the course objectives. I put them all in these simple and plain points. So the primary scope of this course is to search for the prominent stylistic features and functions that characterize literary language. Alright, so we're going to study the text in terms of the language used, the grammar, the layout, and we will focus on the stylistic features, the abnormal linguistic features. All right, of course we're gonna focus on the normal and the abnormal, but still with a special attention to those deviant stylistic features. All right, this will be done by the application of the same framework you adopted in the previous courses of varieties. That is to say, varieties 1, 2, and 3. Of course, we're not coming up with a new framework of analysis. We will simply adopt the same kind of analysis, exactly the same paradigm of analysis to analyze the text that we have in your course book. By the end of this course, hopefully, you will be able to identify the literary elements that characterize the language of literature. All right, so I hope by the end of this course you're going to be able to learn about elements of literariness and what makes a text literary. You will further enhance your appreciation to literature by developing critical reading strategies to literary text. It will enable you to apply skills of close reading and close linguistic analysis to the two literary genres, narrative and poetry. Since we're doing stylistic analysis, why not to learn something about it? Or why not to define it? Alright, so stylistics is a self-explanatory word. It comes from the word style. And style is a very important aspect in literature. Okay, so how would you define the word style? Style is simply the manner of expression of a particular writer produced by choice of words, sentence structures, use of literary devices, and other elements of composition. Every writer has their own style. How can we understand or infer the style of any writer. It's by looking at the various stylistic choices or elements and devices in the text. By looking at these stylistic elements and devices in the text, and we examine the effect of the elements, we understand the writer's style. Okay, so like all text analyses, we are trying to put together a bigger picture of how the author goes about doing what he does and why he does it in this way. Okay, and this is all done under the paradigm of stylistics. All right, so the thing to remember is that every writer has their own unique style. There are no two writers who have the same style. Okay, so the way the author forms the text will affect the way the reader interprets the information. Every piece of text can be written in a variety of styles. Okay, so it's all about the author. I'm gonna ask you a question. How many writers have their own particular style? Think about your favorite author or poet. Why do you like them? Why you think is that this particular writer has a peculiar style? Okay, so you have to think about it and justify. Other questions? This is a very good question, by the way. What makes Shakespeare, for example, different from Chaucer? Or what makes Hemingway different from Faulkner? Or what makes Robert Frost, my favorite poet, different from E. Cummings? Okay, if I am to answer the second question, what makes Hemingway different from Faulkner? In fact, both Hemingway and Faulkner lived somehow during the same period of time. Both of them belonged to the same part of the US. They belonged to the southern part of the US. But still, they are poles apart. They are different. Alright? Why? Because everyone has their own style. Both writers indeed address the same themes, almost. But still, Hemingway and Faulkner are never the same. First of all, Hemingway tends to use down-to-earth kind of style. Very plain, simple, direct. However, it's deep and always his style has always been characterized by or described as an iceberg style, where you say little but you mean a lot. As for Faulkner, Faulkner uses very much sophisticated language, fancy diction, complex sentence structures. Alright, so both of them are writers, but they are different, as I told you. Okay, they maybe share many things in common as as persons, but as writers they are different. They are completely different, and we cannot put both of them on a par. So, stylistic analysis, you know that stylistic as a term is defined as the scientific study of style. So, the examination of any text inquires the stylistic or the systematic or the scientific description of the linguistic features, okay, that are found in the text. We are concerned with the examination of grammar, of the layout, of the lexis, of the semantics, as well as phonological properties, okay, and the rhetorical devices in the text. All right, so we should always be sensitive to all features of language use. All right, now this is so the stylistic analysis entails the analysis or the examination of the layout. So the first thing to do when you are asked to analyze any text, including a literary text, the first thing you do is that you look at the text and you examine the layout. The layout, what do we mean by the layout? It refers or it entails paragraphing. Are there any paragraphs? Are the paragraphs long or short? How many paragraphs are there? 1, 2, 3. All right. And then the titling. Do we have a title? Are there subtitles? Okay. If you find, that's okay. If you don't find, mention it. Okay. So every single detail is of paramount weight in your analysis. Punctuation. Okay. Are the punctuation marks used formally or they are used abnormally? Is there a specific punctuation mark that is recurrently used or not? Capitalization, figures and symbols, photography and chromatics. Okay, so this is exactly the same paradigm of analysis that you did back in your varieties 1 and 2 and 3. We are doing it again here. Okay, after we describe the layout, then we move to describe the grammar. And when we talk about the grammar, that doesn't just entail what tense is used or what, it also entails many features like the sentence structures. Are the sentences simple, compound, complex? How are the clause structures? What kind of noun phrases do we have? Pre-modifications, post-modifications, the genitives, and how about the verb phrases, tense, voice, adjectives, adverbs, sentence connectivity, even at the level of connectors. The connectors or sentence connectivity refers, for example, to words like and, coordinators, or. Okay, so these words are also of importance and significance. So after you finish with the layout and the grammar, you move to a different level. That is the level of vocabulary. All right. In vocabulary, we'll look at the core vocabulary. Are there any lexical repetitions? Are there any synonyms, antonyms, colloquialism? Are there any technical terms, foreign words, archaism, figures of rhetoric, simile, metaphor, irony, hyperbole, personification? And finally, or at last, but no means least, phonology. We have the rhyme, the rhythm, alliteration, assonance, consonants. So these are all important when doing a critical examination of any text. Okay. Remember, and this is just to repeat myself, stylistic analysis covers all features of language. Stylistics is based on observation and description of language features, the usual and the unusual use of language. The first thing that you do when you perform the analysis of any literary text is that you observe it. Okay, you read it, then you observe it, then you describe it. Okay, if there is anything that you find striking or that you find prominent, foregrounding, deviant, that you find, for example, unusual. And of course, after maybe you count for the unusual use of language features, then also you must describe the usual use of language. Okay, for example, this writer uses simple sentences. This writer depends on using compound adjectives. Alright, these are simple or ordinary use of language, but they are specific to this writer, is that this writer usually uses this kind of wording, and this is what makes his style so and so. Alright, so literary stylistic analysis is highly descriptive, again, objective, because we are not approaching the content of the text, but we are approaching the linguistic data of the text. Alright, we are not interested in the psyche of the characters, how the narration and the plot unfolds, how the personal life of the author is impacted in the in the story. We are not doing literary criticism analysis, we are doing stylistic analysis. Okay, so that's why it's very objective here. So as it approaches the literary text systematically, it deconstruct. Okay, deconstruct, it's the opposite of construct, that is to build. We're not building here, we are break the text into parts in order to understand it, and then you reconstruct it again. Alright, so it deconstructs the text and study the author's linguistic choices in the literary content. In your core textbook, the analysis takes a comparative approach. In other words, the writer simultaneously describes the stylistic feature of narrative and poetry together. But as for me, I prefer, in fact, to slender them or divide them into two parts, where you study the stylistic aspects of each genre independently and separately. I hope it would be a good idea. So let's begin with narrative. So now we're going to read a passage from Charles Dickens' masterpiece Hard Times, chapter 5. In fact, you don't have to know about the novel's plot or anything. All you need to know is that this passage describes a place called Cocktown City. Please pause this video, take a minute to read the passage on your own. You're gonna find the passage on your book, page 250. So now that you read it, can you find answers for these questions? Are there any titles or subtitles in the passage? How many paragraphs are there in the text? Are the paragraphs long or short? Are they organized or laid out at random? Are there any in-text dialogues? Are the sentences simple or complex? What is the most recurrent or the most overused punctuation mark? Are there any repetitive words throughout the passage? Are the words used in this passage or in this paragraph belong to a certain social class, vocation, era of time, or field? Now, if you answer these questions, or if you could find the answers to these questions in this passage, then you already actually have done your stylistic analysis to the text. Okay, because this is, in fact, these questions touches upon all levels of uh, the author's linguistic choices, almost. All right, so try to find answers so that it really helps you in the analysis to come to find out more about the essence of the author's style. So the first level of stylistic analysis is with layout, specifically paragraphing. Descriptive paragraphs in narrative tend to overlap and complete one another to give a total description. The ideas usually tend to flow in a chronological and rational order within the paragraphs. You know that most of the narratives, such as novels and short stories, they usually start with descriptive accounts so that they can set the ground for the setting and for the characters as well. It's where we get to know the characters and the place where the story takes place. Okay, and so this is usually done with extreme clarity and this is done also in a very chronological and rational order within descriptive paragraphs. Okay, we will see that the stylistic function of these is of this organization of description of narrative indeed is to organize the ideas in the reader's mind, and also helps the reader to progress in the reading and to make the process of reading and comprehension easier. All right, so generally we can say that paragraphs are usually well organized in descriptive narratives, and the stylistic function for this organization of description and narrative is to emphasize, first of all, the organized nature of literature, and to organize the reader's ideas and progression of reading and comprehension, and most importantly, it reflects the independent nature of literary narrative texts. Now, Charles Dickens' text, which is taken from the opening of chapter 5, is laid out in 7 paragraphs, 3 short paragraphs including 1, 3, 5, and 4 relatively long. Remember, my students, that whenever you're given a task or whenever you work on analyzing a text, to start with citing the text. If you are given any text, you should know where the text comes from, who is the author. So this is how you start your analysis. You should never start an analysis without referring to the reference of the text. Okay, as I did here, Charles Dickens' text, which is taken from the opening of chapter 5, and it would have been excellent if I mentioned the title Hard Times, and then you start with the number of paragraphs. All right, for example, it consists of 7 paragraphs, and being more specific, mention of what paragraphs are long and what paragraphs are short. Okay, now in each paragraph can be considered as having an organization of some kind. Now if you read these paragraphs, you're gonna find that in every paragraph we have a kind of introduction followed by a group of sentences that we can count them as an amplification or expansion, then follows by a final sentence that can be seen as a conclusion or a summary somehow. Fine. Now, In fact, for the three paragraphs 1, 2, and 3, we can count them as a whole large unit, as a one large unit, because the opening paragraphs is the introduction exhibiting the main topic, the fictitious town, Cocktown. The next 6 paragraphs are an amplificatory description of the topic. Now, in fact, we can, as you can see now, for example, for paragraph 1, it's very short, alright? This can be seen as an independent paragraph, or if you read it and you read the 2 following paragraphs, paragraph 2 and 3, you can see as if this 3 paragraphs were 1 unit, okay? And the first one being the topic, for example, sentence, or the introductory paragraph. Number 2 is the body paragraph, while number 3, paragraph number 3, can be seen as a concluding paragraph, and the rest are all expansion on the fictitious Cocktown. Usually the perfectly well organized paragraphs in narrative are the open and descriptive ones at the beginning of novels and stories, which set the scene for the whole text. Such paragraphs have clear-cut topic sentences, amplifications, and conclusions. However, this organization dismantles or disappears in dialogic narratives. You know that we have narration, and then within the narration sometimes there is a kind of interaction between the characters. Okay, that's where dialogues take place. So when we have dialogues, the narration disappears, okay, and then comes back again after the dialogue ends. Dialogic extracts represent incomplete fragmented units that have to be taken in relation to one another and to the large context of the narrative. As for the narrative dialogue, paragraphs expectedly disappear to allow for the dialogue among characters to take place in a normal way, and goes without saying that after the dialogues end between the paragraphs, the narration comes back, alright? And we always have a kind of organization and the clarity of ideas that comes with the narration. Another aspect of layout is graphological devices. So what is graphology? Graphology is the capitalization and underlining, bold, type, and italics. In fact, they are all used variably and frequently in literary language, mainly for emphasis. On the other hand, figures, diagrams, tables, photographs, and colorful drawings are strange to literary language, because literature doesn't rely on any external aiding medium to be understood or interpreted and appreciated, as, for example, in journalistic language or in scientific text, where illustrations and photographs and tables as well as the charts play a major role in conveying the message. And this is one of the main characteristics that separates literature from non-literature. So now we are moving to a new level of layout analysis, which is punctuation. Alright, so all punctuation marks are used and manipulated well in literary language, whether in poetry or prose. And I should have underlined the word manipulated here, because manipulated here is a key word. Writers sometimes they use punctuation marks, sometimes normally and abnormally, and as I introduced or describe it before, that you cannot rationalize literary language. You would always expect abnormal and unusual use of language. As for the comma is used in sentences to mark a meaning unit inside a large unit. And the stylistic function for this is to make the process of reading less boring and understanding easier. So the writers actually would always use commas in lengthy sentences, especially when we have, many ideas inside one sentence. So instead of just put all these ideas or all these mini units in one single unit, they would make it easier for the writer to use or it would make it even easier for the reader to use or to break the sentence into mini units. So it makes it really less boring and understanding here easier and facilitated. Okay, take this example. For example, it was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, comma, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves, comma, forever and ever, comma, and never got uncoiled. You see here the smart use of commas is that they would describe the colorless and the dull city of Cocktown, and the description actually here is very detailed, and it's all done and put in one single sentence. The comma is also used at the beginning and end of clause or phrase to mark it as interruptive. Let's see this example. Cocktown, comma, to which Messrs. Bounderby and Gradgrind were now walked, was a triumph in fact. So every time we have an interruptive clause, we put it between two commas. Here we have the main clauses. Cocktown was a triumph fact, but we inserted the interruptive clause, to which Messrs. Bounderby and Gradgrind now walked. So when we want to add any additional information or interpolation, we put it as we put it between two commas. The interruptive clause, to which until walked, is enclosed between two commas. So generally these are some of the situations that show how the comma is used in the text. So one more important use of the comma is the marking of parallelism between two or more consecutive clauses. This is like a general information in English that we use comma in listing, alright? So we use it also in parallelism, like we have in the example of it contained like one another. You can find it in the second paragraph, okay, in the last sentence of the second paragraph. It's quite complex, consists of many clauses, and they are all divided by means of, these clauses are all divided by means of comma, alright? So we always use the comma in marking parallelism. You can find the example also on page 257 under the title or the subheading complexity of sentences. Punctuation mark that is used widely is the semicolon. It's a very important mark in literature, okay, especially in narratives, because it is interchangeable with the full stop. Usually, instead of putting the full stop, the authors or the writers tend to use a semicolon instead of the full stop. A semicolon can be properly replaced by full stops, as the case in Dickens' text. In Dickens here, there is a heavy use of semicolons, and of course this has a stylistic function. Semicolons suggest a stronger interrelation among consecutive sentences more than the full stops can do, and this can be said the stylistic function of the semicolon. So what is the function of the semicolon? This is to suggest that in every time I put a semicolon between sentences, it means that these sentences are very much interrelated and interdependent, and the idea that comes after directly interrelated to the previous one, right? So because in full stops, when we put the full stop, it means we are starting a new sentence, maybe a new idea that comes after, but semicolons suggest that what comes after is related to the former sentence. Question and exclamation marks are also frequently used in literary language. We may spot two types of questions that are foregrounded in Charles Dickens' text. These questions, we have self questions with self answers, and we have open rhetorical questions. So he used the question marks in these two examples. The first one is where we have a self question with a self answer. You can find it, I think, on page 251. A town so sacred to fact and so triumphant in its assertions, of course got on well. Why no, not quite well. No, dear me. Alright, so here the writer used the question mark as well as the exclamation mark, okay? And we call this type of question a self question where we have an answer. However, the other example, the open rhetorical questions, these are questions that have no definite yes or no answers, okay? Or that requires no immediate answers, and so they are there to shake up your mind about a topic. In the last paragraph, we have a rhetorical question here where the person asks, is it possible? I wonder. It's very introspective, actually, that there was any analogy between the case of the Cocktown population and the case of the little Grangrens. Surely none of us in our sober senses and acquainted with figures are to be told at this time of day that one of the foremost elements in the existence of the Cocktown working people had been for scores of years deliberately set at night, that there was any fancy in them demanding to be brought into healthy existence instead of struggling on its convolutions. Okay, so you see now, these questions are open rhetorical questions that invites the reader to ponder and to think about the situation. So we may say that the stylistic function of these questions is to indirectly engage readers and impact them in a way or another. The exclamation mark is basically used for surprise or expressing irony or sarcasm, like the example here, dear me, okay, or goodness me. So generally the function of the exclamation mark is to communicate and impact readers, just as for the two examples of the questions, that is self-question and rhetorical questions. It is of paramount importance to know that in narratives, writers feel free at using or deleting any commas or any other marks, because punctuation marks are used at their will. For example, deleting commas in unexpected positions is commonplace in Dickens' writings, as the following example shows. Okay, now let's read this example. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black, like the painted face of a savage. Now, in this sentence, we don't have any use of commas. So, indeed, two expected commas, one after stood, another one after black. So, it should have been, but as matter stood, comma, it was a town of unnatural red and black, comma, like the painted face of a savage. But of course, the writer here didn't put any commas. The omission of the commas here doesn't go in accordance with the normal rules of composition. So you shouldn't actually argue about this. He wanted to delete the commas, and so he's free. This is his own work of art. You cannot argue like how come he didn't put any commas here, because again, punctuation marks are used at their will.